Hello, I'm Jim Keene with the Info Management Group of Black and Veatch and want to welcome everyone to this panel this afternoon. This is a great panel. It is about the Wilmington operations that have been under contract for over 20 years. It's arguably one of the most important water P3 projects in the US. It's arguably the first ever long-term O&M contract in the US, the first ever with capital maintenance risk. So arguably the first ever water P3 in North America. With one or two exceptions, prior to the Wilmington contract, the contracts in the US and Canada were 5-year duration, which has a very different risk profile than what we see in Wilmington. Wilmington is rare in that we can see the beginning, the middle, the end, and the rebid of contract operations over decades. So on the panel, we have experience over the decades. We have Cash Srinivasan, who is a former commissioner who was there back in 1997 and has been with the oversight of the project either as a city official or as a consultant to the city. So he's witnessed all stages over the whole life of the contract operations there. Vince Carocia is the deputy commissioner who oversaw the rebid of the contract over the last couple of years. And the contract reports up through Vince today with operations now by Jacobs. And then Kevin Dahl, who's regional director of operations for Jacobs, Kevin oversees operations today at Wilmington. And I'm Jim Keene, again with the Info Management Group of Black and Veatch. I assisted the city with the rebid of their contract. So we're going to organize the panel with a couple of different segments. First, we'll talk about the original contract. And then the middle years that Vince oversaw, and then the rebid of the contract, and then how it's going now. So to lead that off, we'll start off with Cash, who again was there at the inception of the contract back in 1997. And you ask, why is it important for us to hear 23, 24 some years later focus on that contract back then? It's because municipal utility officials who are looking at the at a P3 now really have to struggle with the same very elements that Cash had to struggle with so many years ago. He had his objectives, and he'll talk about that. And then those objectives had to interface with the market, with what the contract operators were willing to do at that time. So let's start off first with Cash talking about the original stages of the contract back in 1997.
All right, thank you, Jim. I think you left out one key element, that's politics as well. And I thought I'd mention that because there were a couple of key drivers for the original contract, neither of which had anything to do with optimizing operations at a wastewater treatment plant. Instead, there was an executive order issued 12803 back, I believe, in 1994 by then President George Bush, with the express objective of seeking to launch into privatization of wastewater facilities that have been grant funded. Coincidentally, perhaps, around that same time or a year later, the city was looking for a means to shore up its finances because it was in trouble. And so there was this thinking that perhaps this provided an avenue for the city to pursue that could really solve that objective. And that's really how this whole process came about. And this really goes back to 1995 now, we're talking about. And eventually, what happened was that the city put together an RFP with the goal of selling the facility and using the Executive Order 12803 as the sort of the mechanism to do that. So the RFP itself was structured that way. I'm going to point out some of the key components of the core deal structure. Number one, there was going to be a sale of the assets, and this was going to be at a predetermined net book value. And that number that was picked was $52 million. The city had the right to repurchase the assets at the end of the term. There was going to be an annual service fee, O&M service fee with an escalation index. There was going to also be an escrow account that would deal with the future capital needs of the plant, which would be funded by the city. So the initial concept was not really a full risk type situation. And a very important part of that RFP also dealt with the plant employees, and they were required to be hired by the privatizer at their current or better compensation. Luckily for the process, the RFP also included the ability for participants to provide some alternative cost proposals and alternative privatization arrangements. And this is important because once the numbers were crunched, it became clear that what really comes down to a sale and leaseback structure of the original deal really didn't make a lot of financial sense. And there's three reasons for that. Number one, the state and EPA stood to recoup depreciated value of construction grants, which means that out of that 52 million proceeds, almost half of that was going to go to somebody else. The politics entered into the picture because a key bulk customer demanded a large share of the proceeds as well. And the purchase component of the service fee, when we looked at it carefully, essentially represented a borrowing by the city at a very high interest rate. So none of that ultimately made much sense because you're borrowing from one place to pay somebody else, and the ratepayer ultimately gets to hold that bag. And that was going to be a very fraught situation. Luckily for us, an alternate proposal from a predecessor company to Veolia. Veolia was ultimately the firm that carried the ball for much of the 20 years. But the predecessor company was US Filter. And they came forth with an alternative proposal that proved to be very attractive for the city. So you might say, in a sense, we fell into the deal that was ultimately struck. And a key element of the proposal from Veolia, US Filter in that case, was that they proposed to bundle a series of upfront capital replacements and repairs into the service fee, which really took the city off the hook for major asset maintenance costs. And so essentially, the full risk approach was proposed by US Filter and accepted by the city because it made a lot of financial sense. And the fact of the matter was that when we crunched the new numbers, that really there was a tangible, significant savings that accrued to the city as a consequence of this deal. So that's how we ended up doing the deal with US Filter.
Great. That's a great overview, Cash. Thank you for that. Now let's move forward, let's say 10 years. Vince, you came into oversight of the contract, I think it was in 2008. So this is almost 10 years into the contract. So if you can address what those years were like, both in terms of contract maintenance risk and just your general management of the contract.
All right, very good. Thank you, Jim. All right, so when I came on in my previous role as Administrative Services Director under Cash, I was involved with the finances of the contract, doing annual true ups. We started getting into some discussions with the contract operator, Veolia, as was then it was then under them. And there were different capital things that would come up from time to time. And as the contract wore on, these were things that wouldn't necessarily have gotten replaced by them because with 10 years remaining in the contract, there wasn't time to amateurize those expenses. So these were things that you may want to look at this. So we started. I started going through and meeting with them fairly regularly, looking at assets over there and things that it just made sense because it was our asset to put some capital into and look to repair. So we started systematically going at different components and processes throughout the plant, doing improvements. All along the way, I was involved with the financial oversight, the true ups that we would do it at the end of each contract year. So it was kind of my introduction into it. And then as time went on and some of the folks within the department changed, I ended up, taking on more and more of an active role with the management of the contract and the interactions with the contract operator.
Okay, so let's move forward closer in time to where we are today. So, Cash, you had now left the city at this point as a city official, but came back in to help Vince as a consultant to the city because of your familiarity. And so the two of you, Vince and Cash, you now are 15, almost 20 years, well, really 20 years into the contract. So this is a very different experience. Right. The plant, at the beginning of the contract was like 45 years old. And, now this is 20 plus years later. So 65-year-old assets, referencing what you just spoke of there, Vince. And, the operations were focused on the 168 MGD wastewater treatment plant, but then there were other things going on in the city outside of the plant. So Vince and Cash, if you could speak now to, what your you spoke, Cash, earlier about what your objectives were back in 1997. Now let's speak about what were your objectives for the rebid.
All right. Well, I guess that is kind of where I came in. So Cash and I had always kept close contact after he retired. I moved up to the position. My current position is deputy commissioner for the entire Department of Public Works, the wastewater treatment plant being one of our 11 divisions that we have. So my thought at the time was to Cash was there when the original privatization of operations started. He knows, what everything was like, what we expected, as far as that contract coming to an end. I just thought it was just a logical move to bring him in. So things had also changed quite a bit during the term of the contract. So we also, the original wastewater treatment plant, regional plant, treats over 500,000, residents, wastewater, everything. For anybody who's familiar with the area north of the C&D Canal and part of southeastern Pennsylvania and Delaware County. So during this, we entered into a project. It was a renewable energy biosolids facility. So this was a piece of or a building structure and processes that weren't originally in on the grounds of the plant. We were handling biosolids disposal in a little bit different way. So what this combined heat power generation type of a facility, we're running two cogens, 4 megawatts of electric power that then reduced the amount of power we needed to pull off the grid, utilizing waste heat through heat exchangers to heat our digesters to produce digester gas, utilizing digester gas along with landfill gas to then run these cogens and to dry sludge and reduce what's typically 22% sludge cake to 90+% cake as a Class A biosolid. So as part of these projects, we also went in another direction as far as our sewer collection system. We're in a combined sewer system, so we moved into a real-time control. type of an environment where we utilize major sewer interceptors and stored stormwater after rainflow, and then slowly release it to the plant so that we would minimize combined sewer overflows into our waterways. So I say that to say this, that the thing morphed, and now I had a contract operator at the plant. I had a separate contract operator over at the RBF facility. I had engineering consultants I was using to maintain the real-time control systems. And that was a lot of moving. Oh, and I also had a landfill gas provider that was, we were managing that contract directly, even though we weren't operating the RBF facility. So it was a lot of moving parts here. So the one thing that Cash and we had several meetings about this. What are our objectives with the RFP? I want one throat to choke. This is just getting to be a little bit ridiculous. I want one contract operator that oversees everything, and we can go to that one person if there's a problem. And I put that out, and jokingly, but really the individual company, the contract operator who is operating the wastewater treatment plant can make or break the future of the person who is operating the renewable energy biosolids facility, because they're linked at the hip, and you really have to coordinate the operation. How much sludge is coming through? What can the dryer handle? What's the condition of the plant? So there just needs to be tight coordination. So that was one of the goals. Cash and I sat down over, with the Black and Veatch team and other folks for many hours, coming up with an RFP. We wanted that. We looked to put the RFP out on the street. It was structured in three ways: with a base scope one, which is the existing scope as it was. It was a contract operations agreement for the wastewater plant. A base scope two, which then incorporated all of the other facilities, the real-time control system, the REBF facility, and those operations and operations of our CSO system inspections, all under one agreement. And so we gave the proposers options, to propose for each piece of it. And knowing that the direction we really wanted to go, we were looking at this base scope 2 very, very hard. That's where we wanted to land. So Cash, I'll let you maybe take it from there, but that was our framework for the RFP when we put that together.
Excellent. Thank you. Vince. Yeah. And so the city established some key objectives for the procurement, and the single point of responsibility, I think, was probably the strongest issue, at least internally for us, as to where, as Vince said, we wanted to land. But so now you have these various pieces of the puzzle that have to come together very nicely and effectively for the next 20 years. So we're looking at really on the water side, making sure that the NPDES permit and the whole CSO mitigation program were properly integrated and tightly integrated. And the second piece of the integrated operations was making sure that both of these, the wastewater plant and the REBF work well together. Energy efficiency and renewable energy generation was another goal that we established, really trying to head towards a net zero facility. And then there's economic objectives, basically cost control, making sure we were effectively maintaining the assets, operational optimization, looking for opportunities for revenue generation through resource recovery and potentially energy export. A key objective also was, what's the condition of the asset going to look like at the end of the term, and how would we think about defining where we want to land there? And in a generic sort of way, we are looking to make sure that the city didn't have to incur any major costs in terms of asset replacements and refurbishments for at least 5 years after the end of that term. And so that this has to be packaged then with a very strong CMMS system, computerized management system as well. And then we specified certain management objectives that we were looking for that really then define the dialogue between the two parties. And so the competition itself was We thought it was interesting. It was pretty fierce. We had some good firms that came in and participated. One of them decided to drop out at the last minute, but really the process of going through and evaluating proposals was a pretty strong effort by the city team. I have to commend everybody on how it all came together and how we then proceeded to make what I think was a kind of very rational decision.
Okay, Cash, Vince, thank you for that. Now let's turn to the current state. First of all, Kevin, welcome. You're the one throat to choke. So.
That's right.
So how was this? You know, you were bidding this. You hadn't yet won. You saw the bid documents. Talk to us about what you saw just as a bidder.
Sure. Thanks, Jim. And yes, representing that one choke to throat. So Jacobs was a subcontractor to one of these scopes, the REBF scope for Honeywell that they were running. And so we had a limited scope, but we had vision. We had a vision of, or we could see what was happening at the facility and what the inefficiencies were with having multiple entities responsible for multiple scopes. And we could see that the production that was designed for the REBF facility was not being met, whether that be the dried solids content to make Class A, uptime for that, or uptime on the cogen. And there's a variety of reasons why those weren't being met, but that was something that we were able to observe. And then we started to formulate, well, if I was the city, what would we want to be successful? What does success look like? So we were tracking whether that long-term agreement for the wastewater plant was when it was going to expire and what the city's intentions were to put out a rebid, and if they had the same vision of putting everything under that one roof. So we also were able to, while we were on the ground, see that the facility itself was going to need some investment. As we talked about, it was an aging facility and there were some infrastructure improvements, whether it be structural or equipment or newer technology, what the future vision might be for the facility and the city. So we started, as Jacob, seeing all this kind of unfold. And when the RFP process came out, we got really excited. We saw that the city's vision that Cash and Vince had was really consistent with what Jacobs saw as success and what Jacobs could provide. So we are an operator, but we also bring an engineering consulting piece to the table. And there was a lot of parts that were actually bigger than just operations, bringing in all the resources that Jacobs had to bear into our proposal to try to be successful, which ultimately we were. But we wanted to bring the city what all those resources were, how to bring all these pieces together from the REBF to the wastewater plant to the CSO to the landfill gas, all those things that Vince was talking about to be successful had to kind of work in harmony. So when we saw the RFP come out and it had the scope 1 that Vince described and scope 2, which was everything under one roof, and then the scope 3 was really what's the future vision? What is going to happen over 20 years? You enter these long-term agreements, but things change over 20 years, right? It's not always the same as you thought it was going to be in year 1. Year 5, it could be different. Year 10, it could be different, whether technology-based or the needs of the city change. We wanted to be flexible. So I think we were able to propose some alternates to what the original RFP asked in the light of what the city was looking for. And that's where we came to a deal that kind of, I think, Jacobs was investing a little bit in the plant up front, whether it be a SCADA system or into the RTC controls. But we also saw that investment needed to happen over the course of the 20 years. And we came up with this shared maintenance risk idea. And it's actually, I see the market moving more that way. And as Cash indicated earlier, the full risk model ends up either a kind of a cash infusion has to happen, or the new bid that comes out requires some capital up front to kind of make up for any deferred maintenance that might have happened over the previous term. So we've seen the market shift. It hasn't shifted all the way. There are still examples of all different models out there in the marketplace, but this model, I think, is what the future really holds, and we look forward to more models like this, and we're excited to be in Wilmington.
Great, thank you for that. And talk to me a little bit about the capital maintenance risk, because it had been in the original contract, and the incumbent was likely to be a bidder there. So did you feel that the market had shifted? Were you worried that, proposing what you did, that you might not go forward with the city? What was your sense of that?
Yeah, there was some concern and some unknown of who was going to opt to bid in, because like we said before, the RFP gave some options of what you were looking, how you would bid it. But I think the more full risk it is, you would think the more pricey the proposal will be too, because the operator would be taking more risk, and then you have to price in that risk. So I think what we're trying to do is strike a balance where we have a significant amount of risk on the operator. You have to perform your preventive maintenance, your predictive maintenance, and then a certain level of corrective maintenance. So we came up with a limit of $250,000 per event where the company is responsible. And then over that, the city was responsible. And then we carved out some things that we really couldn't price, like underground piping or the structures of a building, things that have been around for 50 years and might need to be replaced. But if we've got to estimate that price to replace a building from the ground up, foundation on up with piles, it's really just cost prohibitive from the city perspective. Let's put money where we need to put it. Let's do some condition assessments. Let's keep an eye on how the assets are behaving and put the money, prioritize where we want to spend that money as a team versus putting the risk on one side or the other.
And to the municipal official, listening into today's panel, this is very similar to what Cash experienced at the inception of the contract in terms of the city having objectives, but those objectives have to marry up with the market at a given moment in time, and the market's a willingness to accommodate those objectives for a price that makes sense to both sides. So let's turn to where we are today now. Vince and I joked with you guys on the phone the other day. You all getting along? So Kevin, you're there now 2 years almost. Well, I guess a year. And Vince, they've been there a year. All of this under COVID. So let's focus on where we are in the current operations.
Okay, so they took over operation from a previous contract operator on July 1 of 2020, right in the midst of COVID. So the transition was a bit unique. We were putting tents up out in parking lots and transitioning with 40 some and 5+ employees over, and trying to do a lot of that remotely. It was interesting to say the least. So, but we got everything done. They were able to. We did a lot of pre-planning actually after the award of the contract, and had weekly progress transition meetings, we called them, with a larger group to make sure that all bases were being covered. There's a lot of moving pieces when you're transitioning the control of an operation of this size. So that was well planned out. Once they took over operation, there was right off the get-go. I joke with Kevin about it all the time, but the previous contract operator of our REBF facility had damaged the REBF sludge dryer, significant damage. So that piece of equipment was not available for them to use come July 1, and their proposal factored it in that it would be available. So I don't think it was more than the first month I'm getting an uncontrollable circumstance letter from Kevin stating that the sludge dryer is not available, and your cost for disposal of stabilized biosolids is going to go up $300,000 to $400,000 a month. So that's not what I was looking for right off the get-go, but we worked together to minimize that impact, came up quickly with a path for repair, and are quickly going down that path as it relates to that one piece of equipment. Not a whole lot of, a few other surprises here or there as far as maintenance, but we've been able to come to agreements on how those things would be worked out as far as it relates to the REBF facility and things that we found. So it's a few bumps in the road here or there. There's some, some of our contract with the landfill across the street, where we purchased the landfill gas to blend, with the digester gas to make biogas. There's a few hiccups with equipment that they had over there, and equipment that we have on site that they're under contract to maintain. But those are all issues that we work through. We have biweekly progress meetings and are working through it. So far it's been good. We've identified a number of capital items that we call major maintenance account items, primary clarifiers and so forth, that we're going to go after, where the city's putting in an infusion of cash to do that work, and the folks from Jacobs are overseeing the project and providing engineering support. So so far so good into year one.
I would just add that really, the original concept was looking to integrate all of these disparate functions under one roof. And so that transition, if you will, could not happen on day one, obviously. And I think the city recognizes that this is going to be a process to get through, where finally we get our arms around everything that needs to work properly and make sure we get everything working properly and in a cooperative way so that we can have a good future moving forward.
Yeah, and I'll just add, so, Vince and I joke about that communication. It was a difficult communication at first, but I think we have to have those difficult conversations. And what I've really appreciated about this transition and working with the city is the open, transparent, and frequent communication. And it's key that we have that, and which we do, and just to maintain that, and we'll see how we do moving forward. And in the contract, I should also note that we have what we talked about as performance disincentives, right? So if we get everything working the way we've intended and we're planning to, and then Jacobs holds that risk for making sure that those things are operating going forward, that's our disincentive to fail, I guess, put it that way.
Great. I think our time is coming to an end here. Vince and Cash and Kevin, let me thank you for participating today. Again, this is a really important project in the country. It's also one of the largest. I think it's public information that it's a run rate of about 20 million, which with escalators and extension, it's about a $500 million contract over the full term. And just great to have an opportunity to look at it over the full life over many years, and just appreciate the participation today. Any final comments, Vince, Cash, Kevin?
No, I appreciate you putting the panel together, Jim, and it was interesting to hear the various perspectives. Cash and I talk about this stuff all the time. Anytime something happens from before my tenure, I always call him and find out what the history is on stuff. It makes it easy to have a resource. So we chat about things quite a lot. But I do appreciate you putting the panel together, and hopefully, some of the viewers will find it interesting and some interesting takeaways from it.
Yeah, no, it's been an interesting journey for me. You're going back to '95 and even prior to that. So this is a continuing saga, if you will, and it's, I enjoy this stuff, so it's great.
Yeah, I'll say it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Vince and Cash. I think we're really excited to be in Wilmington. We love working for the city, and we look forward to working for a long time into the future.
Awesome. Great. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Hey.
Thanks.